The Trinity Site in New Mexico is where the first ever atomic bomb exploded. The test took place on July 16, 1945 at 5:29 a.m. Mountain War Time, and it marks where humankind officially entered the atomic age. It also marks the culmination of the efforts for the top-secret Manhattan Project, which was led by General Leslie Groves of the Army Corps of Engineers and Robert Oppenheimer, a physics professor at the University of California, Berkeley. Efforts to build an atomic bomb had been underway since 1939 when Albert Einstein sent a letter to FDR to warn him of the potential for Nazis to build their own atomic weapon. And over the next 6 years, billions of dollars would be spent and hundreds of thousands of people would be involved in creating the atomic bomb. And it was right here at the Trinity Site where those efforts would finally be proven successful. But why did they perform this test in the first place? Well, unlike the uranium atomic bomb, which scientists were sure would work, the plutonium bomb relied on a more complex triggering process known as implosion. They needed to do a test run to ensure that they wouldn't just be dropping off a bunch of plutonium on the enemy's doorstep. The morning of the test, heavy rain poured down, delaying the test, but eventually a small window of good weather opened and they jumped on the opportunity. Nobody at the time knew what would happen, and many even thought that it might just be a dud. At 5:29 a.m., Gadget detonated and an explosion with clouds towering to nearly 40,000 feet could be seen. Some onlookers, equipped with welder's glasses, described it like being bathed in an ocean of light. Glowing greens and purples filled the sky, and onlookers could feel the warmth of the sun in a pre-dawn sky as unrelenting thunder from the shockwaves was felt as far as 100 miles away. Oppenheimer estimated the blast to be the equivalent of 21,000 tons of TNT, which was higher than any of the predictions from any of the scientists. The military, in true MIB fashion, had the press explain the explosion as a blown-up ammunition depot, but those at the Trinity Site knew the truth. That is, they knew the world would never be the same. If you want to visit the Trinity Site, the good news is that it's free to visit, but the bad news is that it's only open 2 days out of the year, and that's usually the first Saturday of April and the first Saturday of October, although sometimes they do change it up. There are 3 main ways that you can visit the Trinity Site. The first is to join the Alamogordo Caravan, and this is a special caravan that lines up at around 7 a.m. at the Tularosa High School, which is just a little bit north of Alamogordo. To join this though, you'll have to be the first of 125 vehicles. The tour will enter the missile range at around 8 a.m. and it arrives at the Trinity Site at 10 a.m. So they take a southeast approach through the Tularosa gate, which is only open to that caravan. The caravan journey is going to be an 85-mile trip one way to the Trinity Site, so you're going to be driving for a decent amount of time with that caravan. And we actually wanted to just travel at our own pace, so we opted for the second option, which is to go through the Stallion Gate. Keep in mind that the entire site does close promptly at 3:30 p.m., so you want to give yourself plenty of time to visit. I would say that giving yourself an hour and a half is a good amount of time, but for other people, they might want to actually spend a little bit more time. The third option is to just look into booking a paid tour. So for example, the New Mexico Museum of Space History, they offer a $95 package where you get a ride to and from the site on a bus. They offer you some snacks and also give you access to the museum. So I have a few quick tips for the Trinity Site. The first thing I would recommend is to arrive there early because the line really starts to get backed up pretty quickly, as you can tell by this video. So we arrived around an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes before it opened, and we were among the first to get in. Keep in mind that you cannot bring any weapons or anything illegal like drugs into the site, and whenever you go through the gate, they'll ask you to confirm that and also ask you to show an ID for any passengers that are 18 years or older. There's also no photography or videos allowed except for at Ground Zero and at the McDonald Ranch House, so you might want to consider disabling your dash cam if you have one, and also hold off on getting any photos or videos with your phone until you actually arrive at the site. And finally, they should accept credit cards for the different souvenirs and concession stands, but I would actually bring some cash just in case they don't have those running. All right, so we just arrived, and it only took a couple of minutes to get through the security checkpoint. Just had to flash your ID basically and let them know you're not carrying any weapons or anything illegal. And then it's probably about a 15-minute drive from the Stallion Gate, driving in about 40 miles per hour speed limit on a paved road, so not too bad. And then you get into a really large parking area and just get kind of directed to your exact spot by different military personnel. And then like I said before, we decided to pretty much hit up ground zero right off the bat, so that's where we're headed to now. It's about a quarter-mile walk from the parking lot. So ground zero is obviously where the atomic bomb gadget exploded, and whenever they did the test, they had it hoisted from a 100-foot steel tower that was basically instantly vaporized whenever the explosion happened, and it left about a half-mile wide crater about 8 feet deep. And in the middle now they have a monument that they put up in 1965. It's about a 12-foot lava rock obelisk, and it marks the exact spot where the explosion happened. So I believe this is the remnants from the steel tower that hoisted the bomb. This is all that's left of a 100-foot steel tower, instantly vaporized. There's a fence located on the perimeter of ground zero, and if you take a look, you'll see a lot of different photographs, and I'd recommend you to just kind of stroll along the fence and check them out, because they'll give you some insight into what everything looked like at the time of the test. So if you were wondering what the bomb looked like when it exploded, here is the explosion at 0.025 seconds. And they kind of give you a little timeline of what the explosion looked like a little bit later. You can see it's a little bigger. And here's another shot. All right, so we just went through all of the different photographs, and now we're going to head over to this structure that actually covered an original area of the crater, of the soil, and I guess tried to preserve it, but a bunch of sand and dust got into it and basically covered up that original surface. And so they did have a viewing area that I heard was closed, but it looks like someone is actually looking through a viewing area, so maybe they reopened it or built a new one, I'm not sure. So the next area we're gonna go check out is this little replica of Fat Man. It was the bomb dropped on Nagasaki, and in case you didn't know, Nagasaki was not the original target for Fat Man. It was actually another city, but because the weather was so bad, I think there was like bad cloud coverage, they had to go with the alternate target, which was Nagasaki. All right, so we're at ground zero, and we're actually looking for Trinitite, which is one of the main attractions here. And if you don't know, Trinitite is this green glass-like substance that was created after the impact of the explosion. And there's two sort of different explanations as to how it formed. I'm not sure which one is more accurate, but one basic one is just that the sheer heat from the explosion just fused the sand into that glass-like substance. And another one is that, a little bit more interesting, and it's that the explosion essentially gouged out the sand underneath it and shot it up into the sky, into the fireball. And that extreme heat then liquefied it, and it essentially rained down Trinitite, and it eventually hardened whenever it landed, and that's what resulted in that cool looking greenish glass. So not all Trinitite is actually green. Some of it's kind of a darker color, and other types are actually reddish, and they believe that the different colors are due to the different elements that got in after some of the structures were vaporized. So for example, the steel tower that was vaporized, that hoisted gadget would have resulted in darker, kind of blackish colored Trinitite. And then some of the redder Trinitite is actually formed from the copper in the wires that melted. So it's actually pretty cool that you can find different colors of it. And Brad actually just found a piece of Trinitite right here. You can see, take a look, you can kind of see it glistening, and it's definitely a green-like substance. And I even heard that some of the pilots that flew over the Ground Zero site actually said that this area looked like basically like a fresh lawn because it was so green from this stuff. So pretty cool to think about. If you're not able to find any Trinitite on your own, or even if you do, you want to check out the Trinitite viewing station. It's a pretty cool spot where you can actually test out a Geiger counter and get some readings on Trinitite radiation levels, as well as some other substances that they might have out on the table. They also have a really beautiful display of Trinitite, and you can get a really close look and even pick up some of the radioactive glass if you're willing to do so. Now, if you want to take some Trinitite home with you, keep in mind that it is illegal to remove it from Ground Zero, but there actually is a place where you can purchase some. So if you exit out of the Stallion Gate and you head east along the main road, you'll see a spot where they have a sign saying we sell Trinitite, so you can check that out. And also, if you just want to check out some more Trinitite, you can head to the Space Museum at Alamogordo, and they have a pretty cool looking exhibit with a little replica of the Trinity Monument. So to get to the McDonald Ranch House, you're just gonna head over to the ranch bus stop, wait for a bus to arrive, and it'll take you about 10 minutes or so to get over to the site. You'll unload and take a short sandy walk over to the ranch house, and you'll be right there. So we're at the McDonald Ranch House, which is where they actually assembled the bomb before the test. And this is the ranch house behind me. It was built back in 1913 and eventually taken over by the government in 1942 in opposition to the owners. And I think the owners actually ended up having some kind of an armed resistance at some point because they didn't want to give up the ranch. But anyways, you can go inside and see the actual assembly room. So if you go right in the entrance there, you can check out the assembly room. And so it was on July 11th that the plutonium core was delivered to this ranch house, and then it would be assembled just a couple of days later in time for the test on July 16th. So it's pretty interesting that you know, they had a bunch of sensitive equipment in here, so they actually sealed the windows with plastic, and you can still see some of the nails in the windows that they used to nail that plastic to the windows, which is pretty cool. And this ranch house is about 2 miles away from Ground Zero. So when it exploded, it was basically still intact. The windows were probably all blown out, but the actual structure was intact and remained in pretty good condition. But it was actually weather over the years, rain leaking through the roof, that caused a lot of damage. And that's why they had to do a renovation in 1984. And the National Park Service restored it to what it would have looked like if it were still 1945. All right, so we just finished up at the McDonald Ranch House. Pretty cool to see the room where the bomb was assembled and see some of those nails still in the window where they used to cover up for the explosion, so or to get the dust out. So pretty cool visit so far, and now we're just headed back to the bus to go check out Jumbo. All right, so we just checked out Jumbo, which is actually a really cool structure. Whenever it was brought out here, it was actually the heaviest item ever sent by rail, which is pretty cool. It's like 26 feet long, 14 inches thick, but it actually was not used at the Trinity test. So the thinking was that the conventional explosives that were used might actually just not set off that chain reaction and send the plutonium just dispersed all around, and they would essentially waste the plutonium, or it would be extremely difficult to find it and get it back. And so they built that huge structure to contain the plutonium, but as time went on, they actually developed enough plutonium that they didn't need it, and so they decided not to use it, and instead they hoisted it from a tower about 800 yards from ground zero, and that tower was basically instantly vaporized, but Jumbo just fell to the ground and was still intact. But about a year later, they actually used it in a different test and blew out the bottom of it. So that's why whenever you see it, it looks like it was used in the test and is not fully intact. So you'll be happy to know that the Trinity site does have bathrooms on site. In fact, it's a whole corner of porta potties. They are kind of far removed from the parking lot, so you do have to walk a little bit, and that's just due to some kind of regulations. They do have porta potties at the McDonald ranch house though, so if you don't feel like walking all over there, or if there's a line, chances are there will not be a line at the McDonald ranch house. As far as souvenirs go, you will find a souvenir stand there selling all of the staple souvenirs like magnets, stickers and patches and things like that, and they're all pretty reasonably priced. We actually purchased a little fat man magnet that we've stuck on our refrigerator, so we have a little keepsake. They also have a concession stand, and they sell different things like breakfast burritos, hamburgers, hot dogs, and we tried out one of their breakfast burritos, and actually it was pretty good. All right, just ordered a radioactive breakfast burrito, so see how this goes. There are a few different cities relatively close to the Trinity site, but you're probably gonna have to drive a few hours total on the day that you visit, so just keep that in mind. We chose to stay in Alamogordo, which is just a couple of hours south, and I really enjoyed that stay. We were able to explore White Sands National Park, check out the Space Museum, and they also have some cool places to eat. So it was a nice little town. But if you're on the north side, you might want to consider staying in Albuquerque. I know that they also have a nuclear museum, and it's also pretty close to Santa Fe and Los Alamos. And Los Alamos was essentially the headquarters of the Manhattan Project. It's really where they put together everything. And they still have some structures out there from the 1940s. And I believe they also have a couple of museums for you to check out as well. So I would absolutely recommend the Trinity site to anybody interested in the history of the atomic era. Seeing the exact spot where our existence was forever changed was just fascinating to me. Also, hunting down Trinitite and checking out the room where the plutonium bomb was assembled was just a very cool experience. My thoughts on mankind entering the atomic age are a bit conflicted. On the one hand, I can't help but to appreciate the magnitude of the collaborative effort that it took to successfully create the atomic bomb, especially in such a stressed state of the world. Depending on who you ask, it could have saved hundreds of thousands or even millions of lives. On the other hand, it's troubling to think about what was unleashed. The ever-present threat of mass destruction by rogue actors doesn't really help me sleep at night. But no matter how much I go back and forth, I can't seem to shake the feeling that the atomic bomb was always going to be an inevitable creation. And while I would prefer to live in a world with no atomic weapons, that doesn't really seem like a realistic scenario in today's world. So all I can hope for is that only rational actors remain in control of these weapons, and that as a society, we harness the underpinning technology to better ourselves and our planet.